Back to the Marketing Schematic. I am your host, Ann Cotter, and the theme of our episode for today is all about competitor audits and competitor analysis. So one of the first things that we like to do with any new client that comes into Top 4, a key kind of stage in our strategy development, is to really look at the marketplace and our clients' competitors. And we often express during this stage that this is not about using competitors to copy, but really just to learn from what they're doing, what's working well, what isn't working well, and finding our differentiators. So today I am joined by Justin Curley, who I'm sure many are already familiar with, to talk a little bit about this topic in more detail. You, Justin, put together a few months ago a really nice kind of LinkedIn post encapsulating your thoughts all about what to consider when reviewing competitors. So I'll ask you a few questions about that, and specifically kind of how you glean insight from competitors to inform your marketing strategy. Thank you for being here and welcome.
Pleasure as always.
Awesome. So we can just jump right into it. One of the things that you had mentioned or put in that LinkedIn post was something kind of two different like trains of thoughts for comparing competitors or looking at competitors. And one is keeping up with the Joneses. So in a nutshell, what are they doing? What should I be doing? And then the trailblazers, like just trying to be completely unique. So you just talk a little bit more about the mindset behind each of those different approaches.
Yeah, and I think the first type, the keeping up with the Joneses, they're really just kind of hyper focused. Usually, it's on one particular competitor, and it's almost like whatever they're doing, we're going to hop on that train, regardless of business case, messaging, delivery mechanism. It's just I'm kind of blindly following while they're doing it, so I kind of need to do it as well. And then there's the trailblazers who, honestly, they say that I don't even look at competitors. This is who we are and what we do. And in theory, it sounds really great, but I think there's some drawbacks to that as well. But those are kind of the two, I'd say, extremes. I wouldn't say those are the only two types. Like, obviously, there's a lot of gray in between. But those are the two kind of extreme examples I see when people are referring to competitive analysis or looking at competitors when they're trying to influence their marketing strategy.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like a all or nothing. Like you said, not everyone thinks that way, but it's either rejecting anything that a competitor is doing or looking at it too carefully or closely and just saying, oh, they have a podcast, we should have a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing. What are some examples looking at like the keeping up with the Joneses? Where do you think that can trap marketers or where they could fall short?
Yeah, I think the danger there is if you try to kind of do what everybody else is doing, then you don't really differentiate yourself at all. Then it's really just down to reputation. It could be down to price. There's really nothing that sets you apart from everybody else because you're kind of either using the same channels, you're using the same messages, God forbid. But that type of thing where, again, as a consumer, I'm now looking at these two things and I'm just going to pick one that I either have a better feeling about or I've heard before or I know somebody else who has experience with them, as opposed to if you can come up with like a message that really speaks to that customer in particular, that might give you the leg up. So that's what I think there's a bit of a blind spot when it comes to keeping up with the Joneses. Also, if you're just seeing, oh, hey, I see that they're on TikTok, I need to be on TikTok. You have no idea how well that's performing. So if you just kind of blindly go ahead and do it, you're, potentially getting into an area that's just not going to benefit you in particular, or your audience isn't there, or the message that you have isn't catered to that particular channel. So those are some of the dangers, I think, of just kind of blindly following somebody that you either admire or that you want to be like or copy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one I was thinking about too. TikTok always makes its way into this conversation for me somehow. But yeah, I feel like that is one, or just channels that you're looking at that's like newer, emerging, and just feeling, oh, I have to be on that just because it's like the new hot thing to do. Although that could, I guess, maybe be argued a trailblazer thing too, depending on where you are in the stage. But that's kind of a good segue, actually. On the flip side, what are risks of rejecting anything that competitors are doing or not even paying attention to that and just kind of going full force into what you think is the best tactics or strategies?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that you face there is then you don't really have anything to kind of benchmark your success against. Obviously, you'll have your first party data. Am I getting the right number of leads in? Is the quality of the leads good? Like that type of thing that you'd be measuring internally. But you don't really know kind of what you should be expecting from a return on an investment in a particular channel. So that's or engagement, and you really don't have a sense of is what I'm doing good, because you're not really comparing. You've got no benchmark to compare it to. So I think that's one of the probably the biggest challenge of it. The other thing is, sometimes, I just said don't copy a competitor, but if you can kind of tell that consistently a competitor is going to market with a type of message, whether that's focused on customer service, it's focused on turnaround time, it's focused on quality. If they're regularly going up, new campaigns, new ad creative, that type of thing, that usually is a signal that resonates with the audience. So you can glean some things from what the competitors are doing without necessarily copying from them. Or you can see if they're regularly investing in a particular channel. Usually they're not just throwing money into the furnace. They're doing it because they're seeing some kind of return. So you lose a little bit of that insight into either channels that are very effective, or potentially even new channels that maybe didn't work out too well. And it's like, hey, maybe I don't need to spend my time doing this because it looks like everybody who kind of dabbles in it backs out pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think looking at the channels, if your audience is there, you should probably be there too, even if your competitors are there. And it doesn't mean you have to, and you shouldn't use the same messaging or the same approach, but you can certainly and should certainly be using some of those same channels if you have the same audience and that's where they're at.
For sure.
Do you find that the marketers or clients you've talked to fall into like one of these traps more often than another? Or, I mean, I'm sure maybe there's even a little bit of both happening at the same time.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I think the majority fall probably a little closer to the spectrum of the keeping up with the Joneses. It's, whether it's internally, there's a lot of discussion from leadership that's like, hey, we're getting beaten consistently by competitor X. So it kind of just gets ingrained in you, like, okay, we got to do what they're doing. We got to figure out how to beat them and kind of at their own game, as opposed to trying to differentiate yourselves and take over that space. So I think the majority of the conversations that I have are, when people come to me and say, hey, we really see somebody's, heavily advertising on LinkedIn or heavily advertising on Facebook. We need to be doing that too. But you got to kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, how are they going to market? What are they advertising there? Is it for a particular service, or is it recruiting, or is, what are they doing on there that you're finding effective? And then making sure that you're doing it and that it matches with your current marketing strategy, as opposed to just kind of drop everything and do this thing because somebody else is doing it. So I definitely run into that a lot more. The Trailblazer is a little bit more of a unique entity. I tend to find that those people usually come from maybe a different industry, and it's like, well, this killed it for us, so we're going to do that here, without maybe knowing necessarily if that resonates with the target audience. So that's, I think, the most common instance where I find that Trailblazer is like, I don't really care what everybody else is doing. This is what I've done in the past. It works, so we're going to do it.
Yeah, I would agree that, being on the sales side of Top Floor, that prospects or clients coming in typically might lean more towards that keeping up with the Joneses, because we do still hear, hey, I'm just looking for SEO, or like they kind of are thinking of marketing as just these siloed tactics that they have to, or like a checklist that they have to complete. Like, I know that I should have these keywords and these keyword targets, and not really thinking about the overall strategy and just thinking, I know everybody else is doing it, so I should be doing it too.
Yeah.
That's definitely what I hear as well. Can you break down what you mean by kind of not copying, but getting inspired by what they are doing and how you would go to market?
Yeah. So really, when we're doing a competitive audit, we're looking at not only just the channels that they're in, but even kind of just where those companies kind of exist in the greater market space. Do they have a lot of brand awareness, or are they kind of a new kid on the block? They're investing heavily to try to break into this market. So I think even just understanding kind of where you exist on that spectrum of brand awareness versus resources dedicated to marketing can really help kind of inform and push you in a certain direction. Because if you're a market leader, you're going to do something very differently than somebody trying to break into a market. So that's kind of point one. And then I think once you start to actually look at the competitors and what they're doing, yes, we're looking at channels, where are they most active? And then we're using those tools to try to see, okay, what level of investment are they making into it? How many, different display ads do they have, or campaign creative, that type of stuff. So we can see how extensive those activities are. But then we're looking at everything from messaging to the imagery that's used, depending on kind of what kind of project we're on. We might even just look at overall just look and feel of a brand to see if there's something that they're trying to accomplish and establish within there. So it could be as simple as when we're looking at display ads, is it very people focused? There's a lot of people in the pictures. It's focused on, relationship level, or is it product focused? That's what the market cares about. And let's put those products forward. Those are the kind of things that we're looking at and we're making note of, so that when we put together our strategy, we can either, invest in the things or the kind of overall themes that we think are working really well, and then figure out how we can apply those to channels that we think are going to be the most effective.
Mm-hmm. What about, like, on the flip side, using a competitor to look at like what's not working well, or identify what's not working well? Can you glean those types of insights too?
Yeah, it's a little more challenging. I think in those cases, you're more looking at, okay, what has been the history here? Maybe we see a lot of ad creative in the last year and not a whole lot before that. That might indicate that things are working really well here, or that they're making a concerted effort. Or if we start to see that there's stuff in the library that's there, but we can't tell that it's actually active right now, that tells us that they've backed off a channel. So there are some ways to be able to gain some insights into kind of current investment levels. Again, nothing's going to be perfect. You have to rely on a lot of third-party tools to do that. But there are definitely ways or indicators or things that, at least to us, we can kind of say, all right, this is telling me that this is either a major point for them or something that they've backed off on.
Yeah, this has less to do with the types of marketing that competitors are doing, but just something that popped in my head too is consulting like your customer experience or even your sales team, because they might hear things about competitors as well that could be good or bad. But assuming it's something negative, you might, think about that and how you can differentiate yourself. Maybe their customer support isn't super strong. So then how do you emphasize how great your customer support team is in your marketing messaging? So that's another way, again, to use competitor insights for your own marketing strategy, not necessarily how they're going to market, but just where they sit in the marketplace.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there too, you got to make sure that you actually do those things well. So don't just say, well, I keep hearing that they're really bad at customer service, but you kind of know, hey, our customer service isn't that great either. You don't want to set yourself up for failure there too. So again, if it is something that you consider a strength, and you consistently hear, hey, I don't really like working with these people because they keep missing deadlines, or, whatever, but you have a, 99% delivery rate, just something along those lines where you can put that forward and really center your marketing campaign around that, because there's going to be some frustrated customers out there of your competitors, and I can get out there with a really strong message that's going to resonate with them.
Yeah, definitely. Or if customers are saying like, wow, this is a night and day difference from so-and-so we worked with, we really appreciate how you do X, Y, Z. That could be good messaging there too.
Absolutely.
How might looking at competition validate our own marketing strategy hypotheses?
Yeah, I think obviously it's all going to depend on the type of theory that you're testing, but it can be anything from, well, we see a lot of activity in these channels, so that kind of validates our investment there. Sometimes there is just you kind of got to pay to play. Everybody's there, so you kind of got to make sure that your hat's in the ring, but you need to understand that we might not be getting as good of a return on that investment because of the fact that it's fairly saturated. And then that's when you can kind of look at other areas that you can maybe focus some effort on and maybe set yourself apart there. So I think understanding what it is you're trying to validate. Is it the amount of money you're putting into a channel, the amount of effort that you're doing, the type of creative, videos versus imagery? Those are the kind of things that you can kind of say, all right, I'm looking at this. Competitors are just starting to do it, but if we establish ourselves today, we can be that market leader, and then they're the ones that are copying us. Those are the things that I think you can do from a competitive standpoint to just, again, make sure that your efforts make sense. And I think the one thing that I find most challenging when doing these, even just personally, as I'm doing, because I have all of the data that I potentially need for me. Like I have first party data, I've got analytics, I've got all that type of stuff. Right. But I need to rely on third party tools in order to analyze somebody else. So making sure that you're analyzing on an even playing field is also very important, because a third party tool might be wildly inaccurate and you might be chasing something that doesn't truly exist. Because you're looking at your, let's say, analytics data, but you're looking at maybe an SEMrush's, organic traffic data for a competitor, and there's just something that's, for whatever reason, skewing the data one way or the other. And you might just be kind of chasing something that isn't there.
Yeah, that kind of segues nicely into kind of the last question I had on sort of what our approach is how you can use competitor insights to benchmark. And like you said, it's really hard. It's hard to do that because obviously we don't have that first party data. Yeah. So how do you kind of recommend using competitor insights to maybe set expectations or set sort of or how you measure kind of your own performance then?
Yeah, I think making sure that you're using the same tool. If you're using a tool to analyze your competitor, use that same tool to analyze yourself. Just so again, it's not going to be 100% accurate, and that's not what we're looking for. We're just looking for a little bit as close to apples to apples as we can get. You can use that from a benchmark perspective. You can see organic traffic or paid traffic in a tool like Ahrefs and SEMrush or Majestic. You can use even a lot of those ad platforms, whether it's Facebook or Google Ads. They'll provide you some benchmarking data. Obviously, they're not going to say, well, they're spending X amount of dollars and this is how many leads they get from it. But they'll at least tell you this is how competitive this keyword is. Here's the people that are bidding against it. Here's examples of ads against it. And then you can kind of use that information to kind of inform, all right, I think I'm on the same playing field as them. Or I can say, hey, they're investing more, so that's why they show up more frequently. But maybe that's outside of my budget. So how do I make sure that I'm intelligently using that money to compete where I know I can win versus just trying to unseat somebody who just frankly has more money than we do?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to look at a variety of competitors, even those that are maybe like what you would consider like the big dogs or sort of outside of what your marketing budget will be. But I know that's something that we also look at with our clients is some of the ones with the largest market share. And then we try to find those that are comparable to where our clients are in the marketplace too, just so that we're looking at everything. And we know that in some cases, it's not going to be an apples to apples. Our budgets might not be that big, but we're still gleaning some or making some insights from some of those other competitors. Yeah. As far as implementing some of the action items that you might glean from a competitor analysis, for a B2B marketing team ready to kind of move beyond those two extremes of the keeping it up with the Joneses or the Trailblazers, what is a practical first step into starting a competitive audit?
Yeah, this might sound counterintuitive, but I think the best first step is to do an honest assessment of yourself. What have we done? Where do we exist in the marketplace? Again, being honest with yourself, because again, everybody works for a company. You think, we're the best, and we just got to get our name out there yet. But like understanding what your limitations are, what your strengths are, so that when you start to look at competitors, you can start to see, and you're already in that mindset of, okay, we do this really well. It looks like they struggle with it. So this is how we're going to kind of go to market to compete against them. So I think taking a look inward and then again, applying those again, we want to be on a level playing field as much as possible. So whatever you're doing to kind of analyze yourself, make sure that you're following those same steps and the same procedures when you're looking at competitors. Don't do something wildly different for all of your competitors, and then internally you're looking at different metrics, because again, there's no connection between here's where we are and here's where we want to go. It's just two different worlds. So again, making sure that you're looking at the same metrics from the same tools, or that you're if you're using some survey data or some information from customers, that you're asking them as well, what do you think about us? What's it like to work with us? And not just why did you leave them? So those are the things I think that are important, is making sure that you're not using two different sets of rubrics for analysis.
Right. Keeping it an even playing field, for sure. That's a really good point, is starting with looking at yourself. I think the other thing that we ask clients to do too is choosing the right competitors. A lot of times we'll hear like, oh, so-and-so down the street because I see their sign every day, or I hear through the grapevine that they're stealing our business. But then when you look them up, they don't have a website. They're not doing any sort of marketing. So it's like, maybe there's some others out there that we should be looking at more closely. So I think, like I said before, like choosing a variety of competitors, the ones that truly are kind of one-to-one with you, and then picking some that might be have a bigger market share, but they're still worth looking at.
I like to say, if you can get 2 to 3 people who are about the same as you, whether that's revenue wise, you have a good sense that we're kind of in the same area, number of employees, however you want, or even just geographically, we kind of exist in the same circles. And then I like to have kind of one aspirational goal. Like maybe don't say like, I want to compete with like Caterpillar or Grainger, but maybe it's just that next step down below that. But that, somebody's kind of well established in the marketplace. And then sometimes even just looking at somebody who might be smaller than you, but it's very clear that they're making a really big push, because again, you're going to understand they're going to be hyper focused on what's going to get us the best return. So then looking at what they're doing can help make some decisions on your end as well.
Definitely. You touched on this a little bit, but I don't know if you I think you might have mentioned SEMrush, but just in general, are there tools that you use or recommend using to gather competitive insights, whether it's marketplace or I get asked a lot, like, how can I tell if our competitors are running ads or things like that? Any tools that you suggest looking at?
Yeah, definitely. I think from just like a business intelligence standpoint, just understanding, maybe how big they are, or, what markets they are, how big their sales team is, things like that. Like, information like Zoom Info or Apollo is another tool that we've used to kind of gain some just more general business insights into the competition. On the search marketing side of things, anything from SEMrush, Ahrefs, and Majestic, I think are the 3 that I probably most commonly come across that are going to give you some insights into maybe some organic keywords that they rank for, how much traffic they get in an average month, maybe what they're bidding on from a paid perspective. But then I think even just looking in those ad platforms, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Meta, which is Facebook, looking at theirs, they do provide some insights. Even if it's just ad creative, you can look at anybody's ad library and see what they're doing. So as much as you can rely on the specific platform's data, do that. But then make sure that you're also taking a look maybe at some third-party tools that might be looking at some numbers that those ad platforms don't want to share, like how much budget they're spending, keywords that they're ranking for, that type of stuff.
And again, these third-party platforms are the ones that you also want to run the same check on yourself.
Exactly.
Just to keep it fair, because it's not going to be apples to apples. And I feel like every time I mention the display ad library to anyone who hasn't heard of it before, they get really excited. So I want to emphasize that as well. Facebook ads library, you can look that up. Google ads library, and then I think LinkedIn, you have to go to their posts, and then there's a filter for ads where you can see what they're running. But I just think I love looking at that, and people always seem to be like just like blown away that that's a thing if they didn't know about it before. So definitely check that out too. I think that's pretty cool.
Agreed.
Another question, and this maybe goes along not just with competitors, but just auditing yourself in general. How frequently of a process do you think that needs to be? How often should you be looking at these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking at the kind of overall competitive landscape, Definitely if there is some kind of major market shift. I think anytime that happens, whether it's a change in government regulation or maybe a huge company makes an acquisition, something along those lines where it might make sense to take a step back and take a look at the competitive landscape because a huge event has happened. So those are more one-off, and again, that you don't really plan for those. Otherwise, I'd say once a year, maybe every other year. You don't want to be looking at this on a monthly basis. You're going to drive yourself crazy. It's a lot of work first and foremost to pull all this information, but also just as things shift, maybe they just for whatever reason really hit a campaign home hard this 1 month, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, they tripled their budget. We need to triple our budget. Well, you don't know if that's a short-term thing or not. So I think once a year, I'd probably maybe even push it to once every other year. I think looking at yourself, absolutely. Maybe you do that more on like a 6-month cadence to see, okay, am I making progress towards these goals? Because some marketing efforts just take some time, SEO in particular. The channels is going to dictate that a lot too. Paid search, obviously, you get a little bit more instant feedback because as soon as you start bidding on keywords, you're getting returns on it. But as far as actually taking a look at your strategy and maybe are you shifting in that overall competitive landscape? Internally, use probably every 6 months, definitely once a year. And then actually taking a look at the total competitive landscape, maybe you could make the case for every year, but I'd probably say every other year would be a solid kind of cadence to do that.
I think that you bring up a good point too of like you need enough time. Like you mentioned SEO and PPC specifically, but just broadly speaking, just having the time to actually measure the effectiveness of your strategy or your messaging or some of those bigger picture things. You'll drive yourself crazy because anytime that you look or try to do an analysis, there's going to be new information. Then you're going to think, now I got to start over. And
it might just take some time with a particular channel just to find the right message. Maybe the channel isn't the problem and it's just how we're speaking to people there. Because if you take what you're doing in Google Ads and just shove it and shoehorn it into LinkedIn, there's going to be a disconnect. There's some insights you can glean from your successful paid search ads or the keywords that you're targeting and the messaging that you're using there. But how you speak to people in a different channel probably has just as much, if not more, of an effect. So, it might just take a little bit of time for you to kind of find your footing in a particular channel, or and that if you're looking at it on a month-by-month basis and you say we're getting no return from LinkedIn, shut it off. You might be missing some opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. All right. The last question that I have for you is kind of about how you continuously act on these insights and not necessarily, like you just said, you don't need to do a whole competitive audit every month or every year even, but how do you ensure that the insights that you glean from that analysis are acted upon and not just kind of sitting in that initial audit and in a report and never really touched again?
Sure. Yeah, I think the key there is to not just run the audit just so you can say, all right, I did the audit, now let's do our marketing. There needs to be some connection there. So it could be as simple as saying, all right, we've identified this particular channel as an opportunity. Set yourself some goals to say, all right, here's how much investment we're getting there. This is the amount of leads that we would expect to get based on that investment. And looking at it from that perspective, because if you're just saying, okay, yes, we did it, we went into that channel, but if you're not really paying attention to how it's performing, that might cause some pain points internally. Then I think also seeing, how effective is the message. So maybe the competitive audit, like I said, maybe it identified that it's people focused, like people, all the ads that we see, all the messaging, the written message even is focused on we're real people here, give us a call, that type of stuff. If you then incorporate that into your work, figure out, okay, are we seeing progress against that? Is it as effective for us as it potentially is for others? And then run some tests to say, okay, maybe we do for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, we do a product focused push instead, and then compare the results for those two things. So definitely always kind of, this is why we're doing this channel, or this is why we're doing this campaign or this initiative, and then make sure that you're analyzing against that why. because I think that's what sometimes just gets lost when definitely when you're looking from a month-to-month basis, you're just looking at the metrics, impressions and clicks and leads, and you can kind of get the greater picture kind of gets lost in those. Understanding the why, and does it take time, or do I need to change my messaging, as opposed to do I need to completely shift gears?
Yeah, I think that A/B testing is kind of part of that. Just like you said, looking to see, just because at one point you decided that this was what you needed to do, remembering why you chose that, and then testing it against some other messaging or some other creative, and just seeing, is that still true? Does it still ring true over the next 6 to 12 months?
Or even just to say, like, dedicate a small amount of your budget to those types of tests where it's like, okay, everybody in the market's doing this. Let's do something a little bit different. Let's try to be trailblazers a little bit.
Yeah.
Within reason. So maybe like a 5% of your budget goes towards testing out a particular message, or going after a particular industry, or focusing on a particular strength of yours. Those are the kind of things that I think if you work those into your strategy intelligently, that can lead to some pretty impactful opportunities down the road. Because if one of those tests take off, you might be the first one getting in the market with that particular message or in that particular channel. But if you're not doing any of that testing, you're just going to kind of get stuck in those, again, the existing channels that everybody's using. So yeah, make room for testing.
Yeah, I feel like that is a good note to end on, because it's kind of a blend of those, like keeping up with what you're doing, the keeping up with the Joneses, but also being open to trying new things. Because I do think there is a blend of those two approaches that actually is what works the best overall, versus just sticking with one or the other. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Justin. Those are all the questions that I have.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure as always.